Welcome everyone to our special shiur based primarily on the thought and the writings of Sofer, as we've been following his analysis and interpretation and chidushim novele on the Torah from Bereshis until now. But tonight is a special shiur because we're going to look at Rosh HaShanah. Of course, Rosh HaShanah is coming up next Thursday. Friday is Rosh HaShanah, and therefore tonight we're going to look at some aspects of Rosh HaShanah in the perspective and drawing on the teachings of Ksav Sofer. So let's get underway. I am looking here in the Chumash and Parshas Vayera, and I'm looking at chapter 22, Chaf Base, Pasuk Yud Gimel. So if you're with me in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, it's page 102. So again, it's Vayera, and we're going to look at a passage from the Parshas HaAkedah, from the dramatic events surrounding the near sacrifice of Yitzchak, and we'll see right now the relationship to Rosh Hashanah. So I'd like to begin by saying that I'm sure everyone is aware, through our familiarity with the liturgy, with the tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, also the Torah reading on Rosh Hashanah, that the Akedas Yitzchak, the near sacrifice of Yitzchak, so-called the binding of Isaac, is an important theme. We refer to it in the Zichronos when we ask Hashem to remember important events. Yeah. Am I muted? I hope I'm not muted. We also mentioned the in the Torah reading again, Akeres Yitzchak. There's an opinion in the Medrash, I think the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, that the event of Akeres Yitzchak took place on Rosh Hashanah. There is such an opinion as well. Certainly, of course, it was the great and climactic test of the 10 tests to which Avram Avinu was subjected. Akeres Yitzchak was the most difficult, the most dramatic, and of course the Torah describes it, as we know, in a lot of detail. And in that sense, it is a great source of merit. So when we seek to evoke divine mercy and compassion, we recall Akedas Yitzchak, because Avraham Avinu was the first Jew, and he demonstrated in the most dramatic fashion his complete devotion to the word of Hashem. And we seek, as I said, to draw on that merit even today, nearly 4,000 years later. In fact, if I can just remind you, the Torah makes use of the word ma'acheles. You can see that in Pasuk Vav, verse 6. Yikach Avram esatzeh ha'olah v'yasem al Yitzchak beno v'yikach b'yado ha'esh v'es and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. Now, the word for knife in Hebrew usually is sakin. Ma'acheles is an unusual word. In modern Hebrew, ma'acheles is a dagger. It's a term that refers to a particularly sharp knife, and a knife that's used for, let's say, aggressive purposes. And it was his intention to slaughter an animal with that knife, or so it was evident to the onlooker. But of course, he had been commanded by Hashem to use that knife for his son. And Rashi explains the meaning, the derivation of the word ma'acheles, related to the word laha'achil, which is to feed or to nourish. And in the interesting phrase of Rashi, She Yisrael ochlin matan schara, the Jewish people they are nourished by the merit of that knife. It's almost as if the fact that Abraham took with him a knife to carry out that most poignant and difficult command of sacrificing his son, slaughtering his son, that knife is a source of merit. So my point is that we see the Akedas Yitzchak as a central event that, in a way, not so much anticipates Rosh Hashanah, but is a valuable resource for us to draw upon in terms of merit, in terms of divine favor, and also perhaps to try to capture an echo of that ability of Avraham Avinu to submit to the divine will. And I could say Yitzchak as well, who of course was a willing a party to this event. I sort of elaborate on this introduction because I want to explain, as we'll see right now, how Ksav Sofer sees an important remez in the aspect or in the theme of Rosh Hashanah in this Akedas Yitzhak. So I mentioned already Pasuk Yud Gimel. So again, in the Stone Chumash is on page 102. Pasuk Yud Gimel 13. Vaisavram Eseinav. Avram lifted up his eyes. This is after that moment when the angel of God stayed his hand. Vayar, and he saw V'hinei ayil achar ne'echaz b'svach b'karnav. He raised his eyes, and behold, a ram afterwards caught in the thicket by its horns. And he brought it as an offering instead of his son. So the Medrash says that as follows. The Medrash Tanchuma says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avram, Kisheyichtu banecha, when your sons, when your children, when your descendants sin, Yiska'u lifanai b'shofar b'Rosh Hashanah, they should sound the tekiah with that shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and I will atone for them. So Abraham said, what's a shofar? Mahu shofar? So Hashem said, Chazor la'acharecha, just like take a few steps back from a different vantage point, and then you can see miyad va'yisa Abraham eseinav. Then Abraham lifted up his eyes, perhaps where he was poised over the mizbeach, over the altar at that moment. He couldn't see the ram from that angle because of the undergrowth or the thorns, the thicket that had caught the ram. So Hashem said, back up, and from there you can see. And immediately Abraham lifted his eyes and he saw the ram. So Ksav Sofer wants to understand the meaning, the deeper meaning of this medrash. What does it mean that Abraham did not know what a shofar is? The word shofar comes from the word shvoferet. Shvoferet is a tube, something which is hollow. And the difference between a keren, which is a horn like a generic horn, and a shofar is that the latter is hollow. A horn, many animals have a horn which is solid. If you take a horn of an animal which is solid and you hollow it out, it's not acceptable as a shofar. It has to be the horn of an animal which is naturally hollow. That's the difference between a shofar and a keren. So even though the Torah says that the ayil was caught in the svach b'karnav, but as I said, the word keren refers to any kind of horn. The word shofar refers specifically to a horn which is hollow. So what does the Medrash mean when Avram said, what is a shofar? Of course he knew what a shofar was. Surely he would have known. And what's the meaning of chazor b'cha, like retreat, go back, take a few steps back, that Hashem told him. Says Ksav Sofer that what the Medrash is hinting to is another meaning of the word shofar, which perhaps you're familiar with, and that is related to the word lishaper. Lishaper is to improve. Lihishtaper is for one to improve himself. The word shifra, the name shifra, and the word shifra means beautiful. So a shofar is that which hints to the capacity for a person to improve himself. So when the Medrash says that Aaron said, what is a shofar? Meaning, what's the significance of it? So Hashem said, when your children sound the shofar, so it will inspire them, lihishtaper, to improve. Chazor b'cha means to retreat. It suggests to like to do teshuva, to like return to where you were previously. You came from there, you've advanced. Chazor b'cha, retreat and return to your point of origin. Not that Abraham himself was in need of teshuva, but he was symbolizing the Jewish people in the future. He also adds that the purpose or the symbolism of the tekiah is his arurus for tshuva, and especially although the Torah says, tekiah, but the day of Rosh Hashanah, we'll learn more about that shortly, is called Yom Teruah. So the Gemara derives that the teruah must be surrounded, must be preceded and followed by a tekiah. Tekiah is a single note, which is can go up at the end if you want, but it doesn't have to. The teruah is broken notes. The shvarim is broken notes. Teruah is a staccato. Without getting too technical, it's because teruah might mean the broken notes, and it might mean the very brief staccato notes. It's not clear. We're not certain about it. But the point is that the teruah symbolizes the cry, the sigh, the wail, or the weeping, and therefore it is associated with the remorse. The reason, says the Ksav Sofer, that Hashem told Avram, or really didn't even tell him, but Abraham of his own accord chose to offer the ayil as a sacrifice, tachas beno, was that the sacrifice, the karban, as the Ramban says at the beginning of Vayikra in the name of Ibn Ezra, that the karban, at the most, let's say, basic level of symbolism, represents for the person who brings it the substitute for his own fate. A karban, an offering, a sacrifice, is most often associated with transgression, like atonement. It's not only for atonement, but frequently it's for the purpose of atonement. And the person who brings the karban imagines that the fate of that animal could be his own fate. It's a way of dramatizing for a person the consequences of his wrongdoing, and it's a way of, so to speak, transferring in his own mind the fate of that could be due to him onto the animal. So the Ksav Sofer says that in this short passage in the Akedah Yitzchak, we have a remez to the purpose or the way that the shofar on Rosh HaShanah urges, calls on all of us to improve our ways. The statement that the Medrash says, Chazar, retreat, and from that perspective, you'll have a better appreciation. And again, this is the teshuvah, which is intended to accompany or perhaps is inspired by the call of the shofar. Now, I want to delve more deeply into the symbolism of shofar and Rosh Hashanah. Of course, this is one of the most obvious themes for Rosh Hashanah, and I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit further. The Gemara asks in Rosh Hashanah on page 33, Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara there asks a very basic question. It's so basic that the Gemara initially says, what kind of question is that? Amar Rav Yitzchak, Lama Tokin Berosh Hashanah. Why do we sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? So the Gemara initially says, Rahman Amar, that's the commandment in the Torah. So what is Rav Yitzchak again, and why do we do it? Why is it then every shul you walk into on Rosh Hashanah, they're blowing the shofar? Why is that? Is that some kind of unusual coincidence? So the Gemara says, what sort of a simplistic question is that? It says in the Torah, that's the mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara then says, no, that's not really what he meant. You're sort of taking it too superficially. Rav Yitzchak wanted to know, Lama tokin umiriyin Yoshvin v'tokin nemerian omdim. Why is it that we sound the tekiah and the teruah several times, and we do it omdim? We do it yoshvin, we do it sitting down, and then we do it again standing up. Now, let me just clarify, because our minhag is that we stand up for the shofar every time, but the first set of notes of the shofars are called tekiyos dimiyusha, because if you want to sit down, then you may. The second set, or the subsequent sets, because there are several of them, of the shofar, are called tekiyos dimumad, while standing, because according to the Nusach Sfard minhag, they actually blow the shofar during the silent Amidah. According to the Nusach Ashkenaz, we do it in the repetition of the Amidah, but it's called dimumad because either we are all standing as we recite the Amidah, or at least the Shaliach Tzibur is standing. But in any case, the minhag is that we do stand always out of respect for the mitzvah of shofar. But nevertheless, the Gemara wants to know, why do we need all those notes of the shofar? Why is it a minhag which is already from in Talmudic times, the minhag of blowing the shofar before Musaf, and then during Musaf as well, we blow the shofar repeatedly. For shofar, zichronos, malchus, we blow the shofar in different sets repeatedly. The mitzvah of shofar can be fulfilled with even 9 notes is sufficient, and l'chol hayoter, 30 notes is more than enough. And our minhag, of course, nowadays the minhag is to blow 100 notes, but already in Talmudic times, the Gemara wants to know, why is it the practice that we blow the shofar initially and then again and repeatedly? Why do we need all of those separate notes of the shofar? And the Gemara answers in an enigmatic, a famous but enigmatic way, la'arbev es hasatan, to confound the Satan. That's why we blow the shofar, almost as if he's not sure at which point he needs to endeavor to lead the people astray or distract the divine attention. It's not exactly clear what that means. La'arbev es hasatan. It's a kind of a cryptic response. And surely if the Satan is the Yetzer Hara of every person, then the Yetzer Hara is a wily and shrewd and experienced foe. And why will he be thrown off his guard or thrown off his rhythm just because we blow the shofar repeatedly? So the Mefarshim say like this: the greatest impediment to avodas Hashem is the absence of introspection. Of course, we're talking here about people who are motivated to the service of God, people who are committed to a life of mitzvah observance, who aspire to let's say, a statutory level, of closeness to Hashem. What's the greatest impediment? If you want to do the mitzvahs, you can do them. What gets in our way? So the Mesilas Yesharim says the biggest impediment is the absence of introspection. The failure to contemplate our ways, to be like self-reflective. And the reason for that is very simple. We're too busy. Everyone is busy with so many different things, busy with family commitments, busy with personal affairs. We're busy with professional obligations. We're even busy with mitzvahs, which are important to do, are essential to do. But if that pursuit, even of Torah study, is undertaken to the point of the exclusion of an opportunity for me to reflect on myself, to do what's known as a cheshbon hanefesh, that itself is the greatest impediment to improvement, the greatest impediment to acknowledging and recognizing and identifying the ways in which I need to improve. That is the work of the Yetzer Hara. That is the work of the Satan, who says that you're too busy, you're too committed, you don't have time for self-reflection. The Mesilas Yesharim says this is the Atzas Paro. Paro represents the nemesis of the Jewish people. Paro represents the voice, the inner taskmaster. I'm talking about Paro from Mitzrayim, who said when Moshe suggested that would take a few days off to serve Hashem. So Paro says, if you're asking for days to, take a furlough, it must be nirpimatem. You're not working hard enough. You must have time on your hands. So Paro says, you know what? I'll keep the workload the same, but you won't have straw. You have to find your own straw. Nirpim atem nirpim, from the word rafui, your grip is weak. You're not keeping your nose to the grindstone, and that's why you're contemplating the idea of doing a Shabbaton, taking some time off, a convocation in the wilderness. Nirpim atem nirpim, that is the voice of the inner taskmaster, which says you don't have time for introspection. You don't have time for your relationship with Hashem. You have too many other obligations which, take precedence, which are pre-existing. And it is that voice of the Satan which prevents a person ultimately from improvement. Says using the language of the Rambam, the shofar arouses us from our stupor, arouses us, and if you can say distracts us or reminds us that we are in a rut, in a rote. We are subject to routine, to habits, to preoccupations. And the Rambam says that the shofar is like an alarm. It's something which the Rambam says, "Hashochim es ha'emes behevle hazman," those who forget the truth because of the vanities of the time. V'shogim kol shenasam behevel varik, and they while away their time in unimportant matters, in ephemeral matters, in transitory matters. The shofar is intended to rouse us and to awaken us from that routine and that stupor. How does that confuse the Satan? So, as we said, at one level, the Satan's whole work for the whole year is to prevent us from introspection, to prevent us from self-reflection, to keep us focused only on the things that we need to do, the obligations and the work and the family and the other commitments and the other distractions, to keep us so preoccupied with those things that we don't have time, we don't take the time. That's the work of the Satan. That's how the shofar disrupts his plan, because suddenly the shofar grabs our attention, which the Satan has been successfully endeavoring to prevent us from that all along. But I read many years ago a very beautiful further thought from Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger was the grandfather, by the way, of our hero Kesav Sofer. Excuse me, for those who joined us at some point during the year, because I think when we began our studies of Kesav Sofer, we discussed a bit about his background and his biography. Kesav Sofer, Rabbi Avram Shmuel Binyamin Sofer, was the son of Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer was childless until the age of 52 when his first wife passed away, and then he remarried a girl much younger, and she was the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eiger were nearly the same age, within a few years of one another. But Chassam Sofer married the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and she bore him 10 children. And Kesav Sofer was the eldest. So Kesav Sofer was the son of the great Chassam Sofer and the grandson of the brilliant Rabbi Akiva Eiger, whose writings and teachings are still being published, by the way, because he wrote left a lot of manuscripts, many of which were not published. They've been published little by little over the subsequent nearly 200 years. That's just parenthetically. So even though this thought that I want to share with you, a beautiful idea, is from Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but he was the grandfather of Kesav Sofer, the mechutan of Chassam Sofer. I'm sorry, actually, the shver, the father-in-law of Chassam Sofer. Says the Rabbi Akiva Eiger, there's a well-known statement in the Gemara. Resh Lakish says, Gemara in Yuma, that when a person does teshuvah, so his deliberate transgressions are commuted and they are regarded as if they were only inadvertent. So the punishment for an inadvertent sin, of course, is much less than someone who sins deliberately and knowingly in a spirit of rebellion or rejection or contempt or defiance. So a person does tshuva, but that is tshuva me'yira. That's if he does tshuva out of fear or even out of awe. You might say that's the entry-level tshuva, and a person's punishment will be greatly diminished as a result. But, says the Gemara, if a person does tshuva me'ahava, if he does tshuva out of love, then his transgressions, his deliberate sins, are transformed into zichios, into a source of merit. Rashi says on the Gemara that the fact that we blow the shofar before Musaf and then again during Musaf and repeatedly during the course of the repetition, this shows chibuv mitzvah, chavav mitzvahs. That shows that the Klal Yisrael, we love mitzvahs. We don't just get by with 9 notes of the shofar, which is enough to fulfill the mitzvah according to the basic requirement, but we do 30 notes of the shofar. And we go beyond that and we blow the shofar repeatedly after that as well. Chibuv mitzvah, that's what Rashi says. It shows that we love the mitzvahs, and that confounds the Satan. Rabbi Akiva Eiger explains why it confounds the Satan. Because now the Satan is in a vice. Because the more that he highlights before the heavenly throne the transgressions of Klal Yisrael, or the sins of every individual, then because they've done tshuva me'ahava, because the shofar repeatedly, the repeated notes of the shofar symbolize the love of the mitzvahs. So if we are doing tshuva me'ahava, then the transgressions, the more egregious they were, the more meritorious they are now. So the Satan, if he opens his mouth, the more chataim that he highlights, the greater is our merit and the greater is our zchus. And that's because of the symbolism of the chibur hamitzvos. That's what the Gemara means when it says to confound the Satan. That's where we blow the shofar. But of course, the deeper meaning here is that by demonstrating a love for mitzvahs, not out of rote and not out of obligation and not out of habit and not out of social convention, but out of devotion, out of love, out of a spirit of kirvas elokim litov, that the proximity to Hashem is that something which I crave and I desire. And when we demonstrate that love, of course, that is the greatest source of merit, and that represents the tshuva me'ava. We have got a few minutes left. I want to share with you a further thought from Kasav Sofer, which is in Parshas Pinchas, where the festival of Rosh HaShanah is mentioned as well, and the mitzvah of shofar is mentioned. So in Parshas Pinchas, I'm looking at Perek Chaf Tes, Pasuk Vav. So it's chapter 29 in Bamidbar, in Numbers 29, 6. I can find it, I hope I can. And I'll give you the page then. That is page 894. If you're with me in the Stone Chumash, it's page 894. And there it says, no, hang on. Pasuk Aleph, excuse me. Page 894, it's verse 1. So chapter 29, verse 1. Look with me in the Hebrew. Do not do any labor on that day. It's a Yom Tov. Yom Teruah yeh lachem. It shall be a day of Teruah, which the Arskar people render shofar sounding. Yom Teruah yeh lachem. That's why I said that the Torah identifies the sound of the shofar with the Teruah as opposed to the Tekiah. But okay, the Gemara derives that the Tekiah is first and subsequently, and the Teruah is in between. Here the Torah says, Yom Teruah yeh lachem. It shall be a day of Teruah. Says Ksav Sofer, quoting the Gemara, that in Parshas Emor, which is in Vayikra, there the Torah says Zichron Teruah. Yom Teruah is a day of sounding the shofar. Zichron Teruah is a day of remembering the sound of the shofar. And this may be a hint to the fact that when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, according to rabbinic practice, we do not sound the shofar. We remember the shofar, but we don't actually hear the shofar. But that's just a remez. Of course, according to Torah law, one would blow the shofar even on Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos. So the Gemara asks, what is the significance? Why does it say in one place a day of Teruah, another place a day of remembering the Teruah? So Ksav Sofer says that the remembrance, in a way, is crucial here, the symbolism of remembering, because the purpose of the shofar is to symbolically arouse divine favor, but as the Rambam says, also to arouse us from our slumber or our habits or our patterns. And says the Ksav Sofer that the symbolism of that Teruah, Yom Teruah, is, as we said before, it's like the sighs, it's like the tears, it's like the crying of a person who is wailing. That is the symbolism of the Teruah, the broken notes, and it symbolizes also the broken heart, if you like, the contrition that a person is reminded of his own shortcomings, how he himself is broken in the sense that his like uh, uh, I was going to say standards or status of in terms of his mitzvah observance is checkered, is riddled with imperfections, as we all are, and that is intended again to arouse a person to tshuva and to be better. The zichron, he says that it's called zichron. True means to remember the function, not just to listen to it, but to remember the symbolism of it. But then he says something further. Lo sagi kishemis ora barosh Hashanah. It's not enough for a person to be aroused and for a person to be inspired on Rosh Hashanah when he hears the shofar. Elish yelo zikaron tamid kol Hashanah. The zichron true means remember the sound of the shofar the whole year, not just on Rosh Hashanah. Who doesn't remember and anticipate the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? Of course, we all do. Even as a child, we do. Maybe the children are especially excited about it. The adults, it's, year by year, we're already very accustomed to it. But the zichron true means to remember the true of the rest of the year, to remember the symbolism and the significance of it, that the inspiration of this shofar on Rosh Hashanah should be remembered at other times as well. That's what Ksav Sofer is, a very simple idea, but a very beautiful idea. And I would like to end by saying that there is no Jew in the world who knew on Rosh Hashanah Tafshin Pei Daled last year what we really needed to pray for. I'm sure there are many things that we did pray for, which we did anticipate. But what I'm alluding to, of course, is the tragic events of the Shmini Atzeres massacre. Maybe a few Hamasnikim knew about the plan, but I don't believe any Jew in the world knew about it. And we all went to Shul on Rosh Hashanah, and I'm not talking us down, but I'm just observing the obvious, that we don't really know what we need to pray for on Rosh Hashanah. We don't know what the new year will bring. We don't know what his orerus on Rosh Hashanah is necessary in order to, what challenges it needs to enable us to confront. I hope that the prayers on Rosh Hashanah upcoming in 1 week's time will carry us through in the year ahead. It will be a year of blessing, a year of achievement, a year of peace, and a year in which we don't require any external shock and trauma to arouse us from our slumber and to remind us of the importance of our relationship with one another and the status and the role and the position of Klal Yisrael within the world. Last year, evidently, we did need such an awakening. We hope that in the coming year, we will awaken ourselves. We will have the Hisorus on our own, and we will achieve the best that we can be for each of us. And Hashem should bless us collectively and individually with a year of achievement, of success, of good health, of parnasa, of prosperity, of peace for us and all of Israel. Thank you very much, and I wish you good Shabbos and Shana Tova.